Thank you, Trina. And the phrase that jumped out to me from your prayer was, may there be a passion for the Word. The Word, Jesus, and also the written Word. And that's what we're here today for, to open God's Word and to learn from it. He was without doubt the King of the Mountain. 9 times winner of the Bathurst 1000 endurance race, 3 times winner of the Australian Touring Car Championship. He was inducted into the V8 Supercar Hall of Fame in 2001 and was Australia's best known and most successful racing car driver. His name is Peter Brock, otherwise known as Peter Perfect, or simply Brockstar. That is, until the fateful day of September 8, 2006, when while driving in the Targa West 06 rally in Western Australia, he was just 3 kilometres from the end and skidded off a downhill left-hand bend for over 50 metres in his 2001 Daytona sports car and hit a tree. The 61-year-old Brockstar was killed instantly. He was farewelled in an Australian state funeral at Melbourne's St Paul's Anglican Cathedral on September 19, the end of a fantastic career in motor racing. But it was just the beginning of the ordeal for those people who were left behind. Just over a year before this, Peter Brock had left his partner of 28 years, Bev McIntosh. Having had 2 previously failed marriages, Peter was hesitant to marry her. But regardless, Bev had changed her name by deed poll to Bev Brock, even though they weren't married. They had 2 children together, as well as her oldest son James, who was from a previous marriage, and he too required a name change. When James was born, Bev and her previous husband had named him Brock, after Peter Brock, which became rather unfortunate when Bev later hooked up with Peter Brock, as his name became Brock Brock, which didn't work quite so well, and so they changed his name to James. Well, sorry, I got distracted by that detail. But as I was saying, Peter had left Bev some 28 years after being together and had begun a relationship with a girl named Julie Bamford, whom he had met through his partner, Bev, some 20 years earlier. Well, of course, that is not entirely true either, because it appears that Peter and Julie had been having an affair for some 15 years prior to this time. So why am I telling you all of Peter Brock's relationship history? Certainly not to be a telltale, as the Australian Women's Weekly of this month has already done that to great effect. But in its feature stories, one of the feature stories of this month's issue is entitled, "These 2 women fought over the same man and lost everything." It appears that when Peter Brock died, he had assets of approximately $3,300,000, which is, of course, not to be sneezed at. And yet, unfortunately, after 3 years of continuous legal battles, the Telegraph reports that Brock's girlfriend, Julie Bamford, and former longtime partner, Bev, confirmed yesterday the ugly 2.5-year legal battle was likely to be settled in the next 3 weeks. The feud began within 3 months of his death in September 2006, with Ms. Bamford pitted against Brock's adult children, and the rift so deep that even his ashes were split between them. The legal Legal battles also included Bev Brock and the executors of the Sporting Stars estate. Ms. Brock and the children, James, Robert, and Alexandra, would not gain any significant financial legacy from it. $3 million and all gone in legal fees and court costs. According to the Australian Women's Weekly, both women in their late 60s, both have lost their houses. And says Bev, the Brock family used to own all of this land all the way back to the freeway, and now it's all gone. And I'm 67 and still working to pay a mortgage. It's not exactly where I intended to be at this stage in life. So where are you at your stage of life? Are you still working to pay the mortgage? Maybe you're just starting out and you haven't acquired the big mortgage just yet. What we do know, as has been highlighted in our series before today, that 98% of Christians are pursuing the exact same course as most people who live in our Western world. The American dream, the Aussie home block, or as we say here in New Zealand, the Kiwi quarter-acre pavlova paradise. Well, Jesus had something to say about this in Luke chapter 12, and I want us to take a few moments this morning to reflect on the wisdom of Jesus, and then for us to consider some practical steps that we could take to help us head perhaps in a better direction. Luke chapter 12, if you've got your Bibles, you can turn to it, or we have it here on the screen as well. Luke chapter 12 and verse 1, and this is what it says. Meanwhile, the crowds grew until thousands were milling about and stepping on each other. Now, I'd never quite noticed that detail in the Bible before, and I'd like us just to take a moment to consider what this scene is like. It says the crowds of people grew until thousands were milling around and they were stepping on each other. Have you ever been in a crowd of people like that? Pressing closer to get to the front, with everybody standing on top of each other in their rush to be there. It sounds to me like Jesus is the rock star, and everyone is wanting to be close to him, to hear him, to see what he might be doing next. Why is it that so many people want to be close to Jesus? Why is it that people are standing on top of each other to get close to him, to hear it? Isn't it because Jesus' message is so countercultural to the time, so different to whatever had come beforehand? And for us, perhaps it's important that we take some notice of what Jesus has to say. I'd like you to come down to verse 13. We're just going to skip over that next bit and follow on from verse 13. But I wanted us to get that introduction to this scene. Verse 13 says, "Then someone called from the crowd, 'Teacher, please tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me.'" It's no different to 2010 or 2014, is it? Every day there are families, just like Peter Brock's, who are acrimoniously fighting each other for a share of the estate, going to the courts to ensure that it's fair. And in Jesus' time, they obviously had exactly the same problem. And Jesus responds to him with these words in verse 14. Jesus replied, "Friend, who made me a judge over you to decide such things as that?" Then he said, "Beware, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own. Take careful note of that phrase. What an incredible phrase it is. Life is not measured by how much you own. Well, you wouldn't think that, given what we hear on the news. The socialists certainly don't seem to think that. It's election year, and what is being talked about? The gap between the rich and the poor is getting bigger. We need more socialism. We need more government intervention to fix the problems. When really, we all know what that means. It's an excuse for more power and control over people. And I'm sure the weighty issues of personal responsibility and freedom and liberty and justice won't even get a mention. Not the slightest look in. Anyhow, enough of socialism politics. Last week I was in Sydney meeting with some of our customers. And on this particular morning, as we were getting ready for breakfast, I put on the TV because I was interested to hear the news about the Australian austerity budget, which had just been delivered the previous day. And it was the Good Morning Show, or whatever it's called over there. And while there was plenty of commentary about the budget, not much news, it was another human interest story that really grabbed my attention. The story was about a woman who had a disorder. And I can't remember the name of this disorder, but I would have to agree that it certainly does seem to be a disorder. Not one that I think that you can take pills for, but this disorder was described as the accumulation of stuff, without being able to let anything go or to throw anything out. And then the camera cut to her living room, and honestly, it looked like a complete rubbish tip. Certainly like a storage facility. Her lounge room was just piled high with boxes, up around head height. And she had these little passageways that went between the boxes so that she could walk around in her living room and slowly make her way from one side to the other, if you can indeed call it a living room. You couldn't really live in the room because there was no place to live unless you wanted to stand up or play hide and seek. Anyway, I was thinking to myself, how bizarre, how unusual that this kind of thing would happen. But then again, perhaps in the West, we all have this disorder to one extent or another. We seem to be attached to our things, to our stuff, and we don't like to let it go. I can certainly attest to this, and my business for the past 20 years has been management software for managing self-storage facilities. Well, of course, this is where you can go and pay good money to store the excess stuff that you have. The big selling point is that it is called self-storage, which means that you can go there any time of the day or night that you please, and you can have a look at your stuff. Maybe you can add a little bit to your stuff. Maybe you can retrieve a bit of stuff. And then you can lock it all back up again, all safe and secure. And you can go home and leave your stuff there for any length of time that you deem you wish to, as long as you keep paying for it. Some customers leave their stuff there for years, maybe even decades, without ever visiting it, all the time paying money. And then, when they die, their families come and order a skip bin, and it all gets delivered to the tip. Quite strange to think about, isn't it? And yet a lot of people do it. The storage industry apparently has greater revenues than Hollywood does, with all its blockbuster movies that sometimes earn hundreds of millions. So when you buy that next big thing, the something that you've been waiting so long for, how much better will your life be? Life is not measured by how much you own, says Jesus. In Cambodia, we had a few times when we walked around in the markets. I guess it's the equivalent of walking around in a shopping centre, perhaps like Manukau City or Sylvia Park. The only difference when you're shopping in Cambodia is that everything is so cheap that if you have $100 in your back pocket, it means that you are so rich that you can buy essentially anything that is in that market. Imagine if you're walking around Sylvia Park and you can buy absolutely anything that you want to buy. Whatever your heart desires, whatever you want, you can have it. Well, that is what it is like for a Westerner shopping in the markets of Cambodia. But does it make a scrap of difference if you can buy whatever you want? Does being able to buy absolutely anything make your life better in any way at all? I guess it's a lot like buying a new car. Not that I've ever bought a brand new car, although I have seen what it is like. The wonderful smell of the new leather, immaculately clean, not a scratch in sight anywhere. And you drive away from the showroom feeling as proud as punch. Life has never been better. Well, the feeling lasts for about half an hour, or perhaps even as long as tomorrow morning. But when you wake up the next day, it's just a car. That thing that you saved so long for, that you desired so much, has not made your life better in any single way. Life is not measured by how much you own. And Jesus, as always, is absolutely right on target. In verse 16 it says, "Then Jesus told them a story. A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, 'What shall I do? I don't have room for all my crops.' Then he said, 'I know, I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll have room enough to store all my wheat and other goods. And I'll sit back and I'll say to myself, my friend, you have enough stored away for years to come. Now take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything you worked so hard for?'" It's a great question. What will happen to all your stuff when you pass on? Will your kids fight about it? Will it break the relationship between your children and cause them to hate each other? "I don't have room for all my crops. What will I do?" Well, in verse 21 comes the punchline. And Jesus says to us, yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. Read it again. A person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. What life is really about. Jesus says that the whole purpose of our 70 is to become rich. Did you hear me right? The whole purpose of life is to become rich. Rich relationship with God. That's what he's saying. Rich in our relationships with each other. But today I'd like us to focus on what it says in this verse. How do we become rich in our relationship with God? How can we overcome the gravitational pull of our culture? How can we head out in a different direction and focus on relationship instead of stuff? Today I'd like us to consider what it might look like to be pursuing a rich relationship with God. So I'd like to suggest to us 4 simple words that involve some action steps to become rich in relationship to God rather than rich in the goods and the stuff of our culture. Out on the seats when you came in was a little handout. And if you want to take that at this time, we're going to just go through it and look at these 4 simple words. If you don't have a pen to write them down, I think some of the guys at the back have got some pens. So just put up your hand and someone will bring you a pen. Or if you have one, that will be wonderful. 4 simple words, and they all begin with the letter P. The first word is priority. How many of you began this year with some goals that you wanted to accomplish? Maybe no one heard the question. How many of you, we've still got our hands up for the pens, that's okay. How many of us began 2014 with some goals that we have written down? Put up your hand. Don't be shy of having goals. This is a very good thing. Fantastic. It's good to see. Goals tell us a lot about what we are pursuing. They indicate where our priorities in life really are. And perhaps having no goals might indicate that we're pursuing not much at all. Maybe we are pursuing nothing, which is a big waste of the life that God has given to us. I'd like to urge all of us to have some goals, some things that we are working towards, and to break them down into months and measure the progress each week and month. Make sure that we're moving towards the goals that God has put in our minds. But what I want to talk about today is the priority. It is the ordering of those goals. Which are the most important? Shouldn't the most important goals be first? And shouldn't they be the ones that involve the most time commitment? I'll tell you a little bit about my goals for 2014 without telling you specifically what they are, but I've broken them into 7 different categories. There is spiritual, personal, health, family and relationships, church, serving and humanity, and business and financial. In each category, I have between 4 and 9 different goals that I've been working towards. And it might sound like a lot, but the reality is I started doing this quite a few years back, and many of them haven't got done, and so they keep carrying forward to the current year, which is not such a bad thing. The most important thing is to have them written down. And I have them on reminders on my phone, and they repeat every month. And so I look at them again and again, and it keeps reminding me of the things that I'm supposed to be focusing my time on. Now, with respect to priority, it is the order that is important. Most important goals are the ones that the most time is invested into. These are the goals that focus our attention on having a rich relationship with God. What is the goal that is at the top of your list? The goal at the top of my list is to spend 30 minutes focusing my undivided attention on God every day. I don't always reach that goal, but at least I have it, and I'm reminded of it regularly. Other goals that I have in this area are to pursue 2 new friendships with non-religious people, to make Sabbath more special, to listen and act on the impressions that God puts in my mind. What are your goals? What are you doing to develop a rich relationship with God? And there are many, many different kinds of things that we can do. So I want to urge you to focus on priority and to put the important ones at the top and to invest your time in the ones that matter most. Number 2. The second word is perspective. Perspective changes everything. Let me ask you a question, and this is a question just for the women. How many of you, when you've had your hair cut at the hairdresser, come home thinking that you look just fantastic? Put up your hand. There's a few. This is great. This is good to see again. Fantastic. The reason I'm asking you this question is that I live in a house of women. And so this happened just last Thursday. Well, you could be forgiven for thinking that the world was coming to an end. But everyone else in the house thought that Leanne's hair looked absolutely fantastic. And I bet that if you had been there, you would have said the same thing. For the record, I think there are so many good things about Leanne that her hair pales into relative insignificance. Not of course, that I don't think it looks fantastic. Sometimes we just need to put our first world problems into perspective, don't we? Which, of course, Leanne realised very quickly. And without doubt, I have just as many problems that I fret about on a daily basis, which are of relative minor importance in the grand scheme of life. Let me ask you another question that is for everybody. Are you insanely rich? Put up your hand. Are you insanely rich? Jacinda's getting all the right answers today. This is fantastic. Everyone should have their hand up. The reality is that you are insanely rich compared with 95% of the world's population. However, mostly we only think about the 1% or maximum of 5% of people in the world who are richer than we are. And for whatever insane reason, we think we are poor, and so we focus on the wrong thing. Perspective. And while we're on the topic, I cannot let it go by without asking you another question. Does God like you? Put your hand up. Does God like you? There's more people on this one. I'm glad to see it. We must understand the truth about this one. Regardless of what we think about ourselves, regardless of what bad and terrible things that we've done in the past, regardless of all the good things we have ever failed to do, despite everything, God really likes you and He loves you desperately. I don't expect that everyone will believe me when I say that, and so there is a verse there on your sheet which I want you to take it out and read it. It comes from 1 John 3 verse 1. See how very much our Father loves us, for He calls us His children, and that is what we truly are. If you're a parent, you know how much you love your children, even if they do disappoint you at rare times. You'll do anything for your children. And I believe that that is exactly the same way that God views us. So even if you don't want to believe it, please try and let it sink in that God desperately likes you. Perspective changes everything. If you adjust your perspective, you'll feel so much better about life. Way more grateful for all the good things that are in your life already. And it will really enhance your ability to be able to pursue a rich relationship with God. Number 3, praying. The third word is praying. I have had to readjust my understanding of what praying really means. Praying is supposed to be a hugely joyful and positive experience. And unfortunately, I grew up with the idea that it was a task to be accomplished instead of a time to be enjoyed. Pray slowly. Stop and be in the moment. Make it an ongoing conversation that continues on continuously. Fill it mostly with gratitude and thankfulness because of your readjusted perspective. Thank God for giving you life. Thank God for every breath of oxygen that you're breathing in. Breathe out your problems and breathe in God's great liking of you. Breathe out worry. Breathe in security and acceptance and joy and contentment. Make it a goal to have an ongoing conversation with God that is enjoyable. The fourth word is people. It is very difficult, and I would almost say it is extremely hard to pursue a rich relationship with God without involving other people. Understanding God happens best, how? Together with a group of other people. Where there is free and heartfelt discussion, where there is openness and honesty and truthfulness, getting together with a small group of people is essential in pursuing a rich relationship with God. That is why it has been such a big priority in our church here in past years and right now in the present. And so I would strongly urge you again that if you're not meeting regularly with a small group of people that you like, to do something about it. Make it one of your top goals for the rest of this year. To some of you who I know are already in a group that is not really working out, then just politely bow out of it. Find one that works better for you. If your group is not talking about things that help you to pursue a rich relationship towards God, then try another one. Whatever you do, make it your priority to meet with people. Adjust your perspective, and when you pray, make it a positive experience. 4 simple words. Priority, order it. Perspective, change it. Prayer, do it joyfully. People, engage and pursue a rich relationship with God. Life is not measured by how much you own. Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not pursue a rich relationship with God. My daughter Ashley recently shared the story with me of a couple in their late 30s who lived in New York City. For years they had lived the rat race. They owned an apartment in Manhattan with a mortgage so big that their whole waking life seemed to be about making enough money to make the mortgage payments. Daily, they were bombarded by the glitzy screens of Times Square, telling them that to look beautiful, they needed Estee Lauder, that to be cool, they needed to drive a Porsche, that to be somebody, they needed to climb the corporate ladder. As they neared the magic 40, they came home exhausted one Saturday afternoon after working 6 straight days again. And collapsing in their couch, they started to talk about what life was really all about. He said to her, "I don't know if I can continue working at this pace for the next 5 years, let alone the next 25. She said to him, "I wish we had more time to spend together. We could enjoy our Saturdays walking in Central Park and watching the squirrels and sitting on a park bench and soaking in the sunshine." Well, why on earth don't we stop this madness? Later that night, after the best talk they had had in a long while, they both agreed on some pretty big changes. Monday morning, they both handed in their resignations at work. 2 weeks later, they rented their Manhattan apartment for more than the cost of the mortgage payments. A month later, they were at LaGuardia International Airport, boarding a flight to Ecuador. 6 months later, they were sitting on the deck of the small flat that they had rented overlooking the beach at the seaside resort of Manta. The rent was less than 10% of what their New York apartment was. It seemed that over the past 6 months, they had started to feel a bit more like curious squirrels than racing rats. They had had a lot of time for exploring, for enjoying sitting down in a new cafe to a leisurely lunch without having to race back to work. They had walked along the beach many times, and they had explored the parks nearby. As they walked along in the fresh sea air, they would breathe in deeply and exhale slowly, almost savouring each molecule, letting their minds go free and living in gratitude for the wonderful sights that were all around them. Their health improved, their joy returned, and despite not having what they previously thought were the necessary luxuries of life, they now had time for each other. And despite what others would tell them, they had decided that for them, there was no turning back. For you see, it is a choice. Being joyful or being happy is a choice regardless of circumstances. And they chose to make a dramatic change in their life, and they chose to be happy. For most of us, a change this drastic may not be necessary. But today I would ask you to do whatever it takes, even if it has to be seriously drastic. I would ask you to do it, to stop being a fool. Jesus said, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not to pursue a rich relationship with God. It is time to pursue a rich relationship with God. And I hope that God will bless you all as you pursue what matters the very most.